The lamp on the coffee table cast soft light on the worn upholstery of the couch. I sat in my living room, holding a cup of cooled tea, and stared at the framed photograph on the mantelpiece. Hope was about 25 years old there, standing at the front door of our old house on Maple Street, squinting against the sun and smiling slightly, unnaturally as she always does in pictures. My daughter never liked having her picture taken. It's been dark outside the window for a long time. Tomorrow would be the funeral, and I still couldn't believe it was really happening. 7 days ago, Irving called me and told me that Hope had died. Just like that, mundane, like he was talking about a broken washing machine. Hard, he said. Couldn't take it. I set the cup down on the saucer and leaned back on the couch. The house was too quiet. 15 years ago, when Roger died, I thought I'd get used to the quiet. I didn't. I just learned to exist in it, filling the space with books, television, and the occasional conversation with my neighbor Miriam over the fence. Roger was an engineer working at a local farm equipment factory. He died of a stroke, quickly, without agony. The doctors said that's what happens. A vessel burst, that's all. I was still working then, teaching an organic chemistry course at St. Prairie College, and the job kept me from going crazy. The students, the labs, the endless quizzes. Routine was a lifesaver. Hope traveled to her father's funeral with Irving and little Quincy. The grandson was 11 at the time, clinging to his mother's hand and looking at the coffin with frightened eyes. Hope was crying, but somehow restrained, as if she was afraid of being judged for her excessive emotion. She'd always been like that, closed off, cautious. After she got married, she became even more distant. She called once every 2 weeks, asking how she was doing, saying something general about work and Quincy. Irving sometimes picked up the phone when I called them, said hello politely but coldly, and passed it right on to Hope. I stayed out of it, didn't insist on seeing them. I realized that my daughter was building her own life, and my place in it was strictly limited. She worked as an accountant for a Middleton construction company, the same one that built new neighborhoods on the outskirts of the city. Decent position, steady paycheck. Irving appraised real estate, drove around town, looking at houses, writing reports. They lived in their own house, which they bought before Quincy was born. Roger helped them with the down payment back then. I remember how proud I was to see my daughter get back on her feet. Hope hadn't looked well the last few months. I saw her in late August when she stopped by my house to pick up old photo albums. Quincy needed family pictures for some reason. Her daughter was pale, shadows under her eyes. I asked if she was okay. She brushed it off, said she was tired from work. Her heart ached, and the doctors had prescribed pills. I offered her tea. She refused. She was in a hurry. We stood on the doorstep for about 10 minutes, exchanged the usual phrases, and she left. I looked after her and thought that I should insist on a normal conversation, but I didn't. I didn't want to impose. She called less often in September. Her voice was tired, but she said that everything was fine, that the doctors had selected a treatment. Heart failure, she explained. No big deal, just needed time. I believed it. Why shouldn't I? Hope was only 48, but disease doesn't ask age. Roger had died at 62, and his younger brother hadn't lived to 50. Then, in October, Hope disappeared for a week. Wouldn't answer her cell phone, wouldn't return my calls. I started to worry, so I called Irving. He answered after the fifth ring, voice irritated. He said Hope was in the hospital for a checkup, nothing serious, just a doctor's reassurance. I asked for the address of the hospital, and he promised to tell Hope to call. She called the next day, talking quietly, confused. I asked if she needed help. She said no, that Irving had organized everything, that she just needed to rest. I didn't press, but something inside me clenched. My daughter's voice sounded strange, like she was speaking from underwater. When she was discharged, I insisted on seeing her. I arrived at their house with the pie Hope had loved as a child, apple and cinnamon. My daughter opened the door, and I couldn't help but gasp. She was gaunt and thin, her skin a grayish hue. We sat in the kitchen drinking tea, and I stared at her trembling hands. Hope was trying to smile, saying that the doctors had found a problem with her valves, that she was now taking new pills. Irving peeked into the kitchen, said hello, asked if I needed anything, and disappeared into his office. I asked about Quincy. Hope said her son was busy, working late, rarely home. He got a job as a programmer for a small firm, rented an apartment across town. I left there with a heavy feeling. Something was wrong, but I couldn't figure out what it was. Roger had always said I had a nose for trouble, that I could smell falseness a mile away. Maybe it was because I'd spent my life teaching students precision, checking formulas, looking for errors in calculations. Chemistry is a science where there's no room for uncertainty. Either the reaction went right or it didn't. I started calling Hope more often. She didn't always answer, and when she did, she talked less and less. In early November, I visited them again, unannounced. I wanted to see my daughter for myself, to make sure she was getting proper treatment. Irving opened the door, looked at me without much enthusiasm, and said Hope was asleep. I asked him to wait until she woke up. He shrugged and let me into the living room. I sat there for almost an hour, listening to him walk around the second floor, talking on the phone. Then he came downstairs and informed me that Hope wasn't feeling well. Better come back another time. I insisted, but he was adamant. He politely but firmly led me to the door. Then I decided to take action. I called Quincy, asked him to meet me. My grandson agreed reluctantly, and we met at a cafe in the central square. He looked tired but healthy, unlike his mother. I asked how Hope was, if he saw her often. Quincy replied that his mother was sick, that his father was taking care of her, that the doctors were doing everything they could. I tried to ask for details. What doctors, what treatment, what tests. He got angry, said I was meddling too much in their affairs, that Irving knew better what to do. We had a fight. I told him I had a right to know what was going on with my daughter. He replied that he had a right to privacy and left without finishing his coffee. I came home angry and confused. I sat down at the computer and started reading about heart failure, the symptoms, the treatment. The more I read, the more doubts I had. Hope's symptoms were strange: weakness, pallor, stomach problems, hair loss. Heart failure doesn't show up like that. I started digging deeper, looking for similar cases, reading medical forums. I came across an article about chronic poisoning, arsenic. The symptoms were almost exactly the same. I didn't want to believe it. It sounded crazy, like a detective story. But I couldn't shake the thought. Called Hope, asked her to come to my place, said I just wanted to talk. She showed up 2 days later, looking terrible. We sat in the same kitchen where I'd had tea tonight, and I gently asked about the tests. Hope said they'd checked everything, that her heart was weak, that they hadn't found anything else. I asked her for a hair analysis. I explained that it would show if she was intoxicated. She looked at me weird, asked why. I told her I wanted to rule out all possible causes. She agreed, but reluctantly. We went to a private lab on the outskirts of town. I paid for a rush test, asked them to check for heavy metals. They promised results in a week. Hope left in silence, didn't even say goodbye. I knew she was offended, that she thought I was paranoid, but I couldn't stop. The results came back 6 days later. I got the envelope, opened it with trembling hands. Chronic arsenic poisoning. High concentration in the hair, indicating prolonged exposure. I reread the report 3 times, couldn't believe my eyes. Called Hope. Phone was unavailable. I called Irving. He dropped the call. The next day, I got a call from him. He told me that Hope had died in the night. Heart. The phone slipped out of my hands. I stood in the middle of the living room, unable to breathe. Murdered. My daughter had been murdered. Now I was sitting in that same living room again, and the funeral was less than 12 hours away. I picked up my phone, found Irving's number, pressed call. He answered after the third ring. Yes, Gwendolyn. I need to clarify the time tomorrow. What time does the ceremony start? 11 o'clock. Crematorium on Oakwood Avenue. Where's the wake? Haven Restaurant. Booked a room for 30 people. Will Quincy be there? Pause. Of course he will. He's a son. He won't return my calls. He's having a hard time, Gwendolyn. Give the boy time. I squeezed the phone harder. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll see you. He hung up. I put the phone down on the table and looked at the envelope with the forensic results. It was on the coffee table, next to the cooled tea. I took out the sheets, unfolded them, read the report again. Every word was like a blow. Chronic poisoning, arsenic, prolonged exposure. Tomorrow I'll say everything. At the wake, in front of everyone. Let them know who Irving is. Let them know what he did to my daughter. I folded the sheets neatly back into the envelope and put it in my bag. I got up, turned off the lamp, and went upstairs to my bedroom. Tomorrow would be a long day. The morning started with me standing in front of my closet for a long time, looking at the black dress, the same one I'd buried Roger in 15 years ago. The fabric was a little faded, but it looked decent. I took it out, hung it on the door, went into the bathroom. I washed my face with cold water and looked at my reflection. Gray hair, deep wrinkles around my eyes and mouth, pale skin, 73 years old. Hope had lived only 48. She dressed slowly, buttoning each button with unaccustomed care. Low-heeled shoes, the same ones she'd worn to her parents' funeral. The dark coat she'd bought on sale last year. It all seemed unimportant, but I clung to these little things because they distracted me from the thought that in a few hours I would be watching my daughter's coffin drive away behind the crematorium curtain. Didn't get any breakfast. I made tea, but only drank half a cup. My stomach clenched, my throat constricted. I sat in the kitchen and looked out the window, where the gray sky promised rain. The neighbor's cat ran across the street, hiding behind the bushes. A normal morning, only for me it was my last, before burying my only child. I had my bag ready last night. I checked the contents 3 times: handkerchief, car keys, wallet, cell phone, and the envelope with the forensic results. I pulled it out, unfolded the sheets, read it again. Chronic arsenic poisoning. High concentration in the hair samples, indicating systematic exposure over a long period of time. The report was signed by a doctor of chemistry who worked in a private lab on the outskirts of town. I had paid for a rush analysis and confidentiality. Now these papers were the only proof that my daughter hadn't just died of heart failure. At 10:30, I got in my car and drove to the crematorium. The drive took about 20 minutes, and I drove slowly, passing anyone who was in a hurry. The radio was off, and the familiar streets of St. Prairie floated by outside the window. The houses, the stores, the park where Hope had played as a child. I remembered taking her there on Saturdays, how she'd swing on the swings and ask for more, higher. And then she grew up, got married, became distant. She became a stranger. The crematorium was on Oakwood Avenue, in a quiet neighborhood with low houses and old trees. The building was brick, with white columns at the entrance and wide steps. I arrived a half hour before the ceremony started, parked at the far edge of the parking lot, and stayed in the car. I watched the other guests drive up, get out of their cars, adjust their coats, talk in muffled voices. Then the crematorium door opened and Irving came out onto the porch. He wore a black suit, white shirt, dark tie. His hair slicked back, his face serious, his lips pressed together. Next to him walked Quincy, also in black, slouching, head down. They stopped at the entrance. Irving said something to his son, put his hand on his shoulder. Quincy nodded without looking up. I got out of the car, grabbed my bag from the back seat, and headed for the porch. My legs moved mechanically, as if by themselves. Irving noticed me, straightened up. Quincy looked up, but immediately looked away. Gwendolyn. Irving took a step toward me and held out his hand. I shook it briefly, dryly, let go. Thank you for coming. His voice sounded tired, hoarse. There were dark circles under his eyes, but overall he looked pulled together. 51 years old, tall, thin, with a narrow face and thin lips. Roger had once said that Irving had the face of a gambler, smooth, impenetrable, impossible to read real thoughts on. I dismissed it then, but now, looking at him, I remembered those words. Quincy? I turned to my grandson and touched his hand. He flinched, looked up at me. His eyes were red and puffy, his eyelids heavy. Either he'd been crying all night or he hadn't slept at all. Hi, Grandma, he said quietly, almost a whisper. How are you holding up? He shrugged, shoved his hands into his coat pockets. I'm okay. I wanted to wrap my arms around him, hold him close, like I used to do when he was little and came to visit me on weekends. But he stood so tense, so aloof, that I didn't dare. I just touched his shoulder, squeezed it lightly. If you need anything, I'm here for you. He nodded, but didn't say anything. Irving put his hand on his shoulder again, turned him toward the door. It's time for us to go in. The guests are already gathering. We entered the lobby of the crematorium. It was a large room with high ceilings, heavy chandeliers that cast a soft yellowish light. Along the walls were armchairs upholstered in dark fabric, and on a table by the window were books of condolence. People stood in groups, talking softly. I recognized Sylvia, Hope's neighbor, a full-figured woman in her 50s with a short haircut. She spotted me, came over, gave me a hug. Gwendolyn, hold on. It's such a grief. I can't even imagine. Thank you for coming, Sylvia. Of course, of course. Hope was such a good person. She was always there for me if I needed anything. I remember when I was getting the deeds to the house, she explained everything to me, even helped me fill out the paperwork. Sylvia went on talking, but I listened, half listening. I looked at Irving, who was standing against the opposite wall talking to a middle-aged man in a gray suit. He said something. Irving nodded, then pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his eyes. The man patted him on the shoulder, said something comforting. Irving's so worried. Sylvia followed my gaze. I saw him in the yard last night, standing alone, staring at nothing. I said hello. He didn't even answer. Probably didn't hear me at all. I pressed my lips together. He's worried. That's very touching. Yeah, it's not easy for him right now. Quincy, too, poor boy, so young to have lost his mother. I looked at my grandson. He was standing off to the side, looking at the floor, hands in his pockets. He looked lost, confused. I wanted to go to him, to get him out of here, but I knew he wouldn't. Quincy was tied to his father so tightly that there was no way to get between them. Let's go into the hall. The master of ceremonies, a gray-haired man in an austere suit, opened the double doors. We are ready to begin. The hall was small, rows of chairs, a coffin on a dais in the center, closed, dark polished wood, with a wreath of white lilies on top. I stopped at the threshold. Hope is there, in that coffin. My daughter, the one I bore, nurtured, raised. Now she lies in a wooden box, and in an hour there will be only a handful of ashes left of her. I forced myself to walk. Irving and Quincy were already seated in the front row, and I took the seat next to my grandson. The rest of the guests were in the back, some whispering, some pulling out handkerchiefs. To my right, Darlene, Roger's cousin, lowered herself into a chair. We saw each other rarely, once every few years, but she always came to family events. She squeezed my hand, didn't say anything, just gave me a sympathetic look. A priest came out of a side door, an elderly man in a black cassock with a graying beard and a heavy prayer book in his hands. He stood in front of the coffin, opened the book, and began to read. His voice was steady, monotonous. The words flowed like water. I heard them with the edge of my consciousness. Something about mercy, about eternal rest, about the Lord receiving the souls of the righteous. Standard phrases that priests say at every funeral. I stared at the casket and tried to imagine what was inside. Is Hope wearing a dress? What kind of dress? Arms folded across her chest? Face pale? Waxy? I haven't seen her since she died. Irving said it was best not to, that she didn't looked bad, that it was better to remember her alive. I listened, and now I regret it. Maybe I should have insisted. Maybe I should have said goodbye properly. The priest finished his prayer, closed his book. He looked at us. If anyone here would like to say a few words about the deceased, now would be a good time. Irving stood up, walked slowly as if through strength, to the coffin. He stopped, turned to the audience. His face was pale, his lips trembling. He pulled a handkerchief from his pocket, swiped it over his eyes, took a deep breath. Hope was... His voice trailed off, and he stopped talking, then continued more quietly. She was my rock. We lived together for 29 years. She was a wonderful mother to Quincy, a loving wife. I don't know how I'll go on without her. He fell silent, wiping his eyes again. Someone behind me sobbed. I sat still, my hands clenched into fists in my lap, stared at Irving and saw the lie. In every word he said, every gesture, every pause. He was playing the part of a grief-stricken widower, and he was doing it masterfully. If I didn't know the truth, I would have believed it. Hope took care of me when I was sick, Irving continued. She supported me when things weren't going well. She was always there for me. And now she's gone. He went back to his seat, slumped back in his chair. Quincy was shaking beside me, his shoulders shaking. I put my hand on his knee, and he didn't pull away, but he didn't look at me. He just sat there, staring at the floor. The priest said the final words, "Bless the casket." Then he pressed a button, and the casket slowly moved forward. I watched it move as it approached the curtain, as it disappeared behind the heavy cloth. The mechanism worked almost silently, only a slight whirring. The curtain closed. That was it. People began to rise. Irving stood up, walked down the aisle, stopped at the exit of the hall. The guests came up to him, shook his hand, hugged him, said something. He thanked each one, nodded, promised to hang in there, a perfect picture of grief. I got up, walked out into the lobby. Quincy had disappeared somewhere, and I looked around, saw him at the window. He was standing with his back to everyone, looking outside, where the rain was beginning to drizzle. I walked over, stood next to him. "Quincy?" He didn't turn around, but I knew he could hear me. "Yes, we need to talk." "About what, Grandma?" "About Mom, about what really happened to her." He finally looked at me. His eyes were tired, red, and confused. "Heart failure, the doctors told me." "It's not that simple, Quincy." "What do you mean?" I opened my mouth to speak, but Irving came up, put his hand on his son's shoulder, looked at me. "Gwendolyn, we have to go to the restaurant. The guests are already leaving." I wanted to object, but Quincy has already turned away, went to the exit with his father. I stayed at the window watching them. Irving was holding his son by the shoulder, leading him like a child. Quincy followed obediently. The Haven restaurant was located downtown in an old brick building with arched windows and a high porch. The wake room was on the second floor. It was spacious, with long tables covered with white tablecloths and bouquets on the windowsills. The guests arrived gradually, took off their coats, sat down. Waiters were serving plates of appetizers and drinks. I sat at the far end of the table, away from Irving. He took the head seat, Quincy to his right. They talked to the guests, responding to condolences, thanking them for their support. I poured myself some water from the carafe, took a few sips. My throat was dry. Darlene lowered herself into the chair across from me and set a plate of salad on the table. Gwen, aren't you eating anything? I don't feel like it. I need some. I need my strength. I took a piece of bread and put it on the plate, but I didn't eat it. I just held it in my hands, crumbled it. Darlene went on eating, occasionally giving me concerned glances, but not saying anything. Quincy got up from the table, headed for the door. I got up, followed him. He walked out into the hallway, stopped at the window, pulled out his cell phone. I walked over. He looked up, tucked the phone into his pocket. Grandma? Quincy, I really need to talk to you. He sighed, rubbed his face with his palms. I understand, but not today, please. Why? Because we just buried my mom. Isn't that enough? I looked at him, his face so much like Irving's, his movements, his intonation. When did this happen? When did my grandson become a reflection of his father? Okay, I took a step back. Then I'll say it in the audience, in front of everyone. He frowned, confusion in his eyes. What are you talking about? But I was on my way back. I went back to the table, sat down, put my bag next to me. Irving was telling Sylvia something, and she was nodding, wiping her eyes with her handkerchief. Lester, Hope's co-worker, sat a few chairs away from me, talking to Darlene. Quincy returned and sat back in his seat, looking at me anxiously. I pulled an envelope out of my bag, placed it on the table in front of me. Soon everyone would know the truth. I sat at the table and looked at the people around me. They were eating, drinking, talking in muffled voices. Waiters were scurrying between tables, pouring wine into glasses, taking away empty plates, bringing new dishes, a regular wake, mournful faces, quiet conversations about the deceased, memories. No one suspected that in a few minutes everything would change. The envelope with the examination results was in my bag, which was on the floor at my feet. I lowered my hand several times, checking that it was in place. My fingers touched the thick paper, and each time I felt my heart clench. Now. Soon. We just had to wait for the right moment. Darlene finished her coffee, looked at me. Gwen, you haven't eaten a thing. Take a bite. I can't. My throat won't allow it. I understand. When I buried my mother, I didn't eat anything for a week either. But then you still have to eat. I need my strength. I nodded, but I didn't take any food. I just sat there with my hands in my lap, staring at Irving. He was sitting at the head of the table, talking to Lester about something. His face was serious, concerned, his voice muffled. A perfect game. If I didn't know the truth, I would have believed his grief too. I felt stuffy. I got up, grabbed a glass of water from the table, and walked to the window. Outside the glass, the rain was pouring, gray and monotonous. The drops ran down the glass, forming winding paths. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, felt the cold penetrate my skin. The reflection in the glass told me that someone was approaching. I didn't turn around, but I knew it was Irving. I recognized the silhouette tall, thin, slouching shoulders. He stopped beside me, standing so close that I could feel the warmth of his body. Gwendolyn, his voice was soft, almost gentle. To anyone who could watch us from the outside, it would have looked like a concerned son-in-law comforting an elderly mother-in-law. How are you feeling? I was silent, staring out the window. He leaned closer, so close that his breath touched my ear. You're next, Gwen, he whispered. The words were barely audible, but each sounded clear as a blow. You better mind your own business. I turned my head, looked into his eyes. They were cold, empty, No pretense, no mask, just pure calculation and threat. Understandable. I pulled away from him, taking a step to the side. My voice was calm, even, though everything inside me was tight. Thank you for clearing that up. Irving straightened, a slight smile on his face. He patted me on the shoulder, nodded, and walked back to the table. To everyone, it looked like a normal conversation between relatives. No one suspected anything. I stayed standing at the window for another minute, maybe two. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. My hands were shaking, but inside I felt a strange calm. Cold, hard as ice. He'd given me an excuse. He'd trapped himself. There was no doubt in my mind that I had to act now. I took a deep breath, an exhale, another. Then I turned around, walked back to the table. I set the glass down, reached into my bag, pulled out an envelope, placed it in front of her on the white tablecloth. The yellowish paper stood out sharply against the whiteness. Then I stood up. I took a spoon and tapped it on the glass. The sound was ringing, sharp, and cut through the hum of conversation. People stopped talking, turned to me. Darlene looked surprised. Sylvia set her fork aside. Lester took off his glasses. I'm sorry to interrupt, I said loudly, clearly, so everyone could hear. I want to say a few words about my daughter. Irving tensed, straightened in his chair. His face remained calm, but I could see his fingers clenched on the edge of the table. Quincy turned to me, frowning. Hope was a wonderful daughter, I continued, holding my hands on the back of my chair to keep them from shaking. Smart, responsible, hardworking. She worked as an accountant for a Middleton construction company, raised her son, took care of her family, doing everything right, the way it should be done. People nodded. Someone wiped their eyes with a handkerchief. Sylvia sobbed quietly. Hope had been sick for the last few months, I said slowly, choosing each word. She was getting weaker, paler, complaining of pain. The doctors diagnosed her with heart failure. They prescribed treatment, but she wasn't getting any better. Irving sat motionless, his eyes following my every move. I didn't believe the diagnosis, I continued. The symptoms were strange. Hair loss, stomach problems, constant weakness. It didn't sound like heart failure. I've been a chemistry teacher for 30 years. I know a thing or two about poisoning symptoms. Several people looked at each other. Lester became alert, stepped forward. I had Hope analyzed. I put my hand on the envelope, took her to a private lab, asked them to test her hair for heavy metals. The results came back 6 days later. I picked up the envelope, showed it to the guests. Chronic arsenic poisoning. I said it slowly, clearly. High concentration in the hair, indicating systematic exposure over a long period of time. The silence became absolute. People stared at me without blinking. Darlene opened her mouth but didn't utter a sound. Sylvia froze with a napkin in her hand. Gwendolyn, Irving rose slowly. His voice was firm, but I caught a slight tremor in it. You don't know what you're saying. It's grief. It's shock. You need to rest, to come to your senses. I know exactly what I'm saying. I took the sheets out of the envelope and unfolded them. Here's the lab report, signed by Willard Grange, Ph.D., chemist. Seal of the lab. Date of analysis. It's official. I held the sheets out to Darlene. She took them with trembling hands, began to read. Her face slowly turned pale. My daughter didn't die of heart failure, I said, looking directly at Irving. She was murdered, arsenic poisoning, months, maybe even years, small doses to make the symptoms look like a normal disease. Irving turned pale. A gray hue spilled over his face. His lips pressed into a thin line. This is madness. He looked around at the guests, seeking support. Pure madness. Gwendolyn, you don't know what you're talking about. Hope was treated by the best doctors, took the prescribed medication. I took care of her, did everything possible. Then explain to me. I stepped closer to him, holding a copy of the report in front of me. How did my daughter get arsenic in her hair? Explain why the concentration is so high that the specialist indicates chronic systematic poisoning. He was silent, staring at me with ill-concealed hatred. His jaw was clenched so tight that his cheekbones were jaundiced. Grandmother. Quincy stood up and walked over to his father. There's been some kind of mistake. The lab made a mistake. It happens. A mistake? I looked at my grandson. Dr. Grange has been working in this field for 40 years. His findings are admissible in court as evidence. He doesn't make mistakes. But Dad took care of Mom. He drove her to doctors, bought her medicine, sat up nights with her. Medication, I repeated. What meds, Quincy? Did you check what they were? Did you read the instructions? Seen the prescriptions? He was silent, confused, shifting his gaze from me to his father and back again. Gwendolyn finally lost her mind. Irving turned to the guests, spread his hands. Grief has clouded her judgment. She accuses me of killing my own wife. Do you hear this absurdity? I'm not crazy. I raised my voice. I have documentary evidence, an official lab report. I can provide Dr. Grange's contacts. You can contact him yourself and check. Darlene handed the sheets to Lester. He put on his glasses and began to read, running his finger along the lines. His face grew more and more serious. Jesus, he looked up. It says here in black and white, chronic poisoning, arsenic, systematic exposure. It's a forgery. Irving took a step toward Lester. She paid someone to draw up a fake document. Why would I do that? I looked at him. Why would I accuse you of killing my daughter if it wasn't true? What good would it do me? You've always hated me. He raised his voice. From the beginning, from the day Hope brought me into the house, you thought I wasn't worthy of her. Now you're using her death to get revenge. I didn't hate you, I replied calmly. I just saw right through you. I saw how calculating you are, how you calculate everything. Roger saw it too. He said you had the face of a gambler. Sylvia stood up, backed away from the table. Maybe we should really call the police. Let them deal with it. If Gwendolyn's right, it's murder. If she's wrong, let her prove where this conclusion came from. Yes, Lester already took the phone out of his pocket. I'm calling. Don't. Irving stepped toward him, but Lester stepped aside, already dialing the number. Why don't? Sylvia looked at Irving with growing suspicion. If you're innocent, the police will establish that. What's there to be afraid of? Irving was silent, breathing heavily. His hands were clenched into fists, veins bulging in his neck. You're going to regret this, Gwen. He turned to me. I swear you will. I already am, I replied quietly. I wish I'd realized what was happening sooner. I wish I'd saved Hope when I had time. Lester was at the window, talking into the phone. I heard bits and pieces of phrases. Wake, poisoning charge, need a unit. He spoke for about 2 minutes, then ended the conversation, returned to the table. The police are on their way, he said. They asked no one to leave until they got here. Irving sank into a chair, covered his face with his hands. His shoulders rose and fell, whether he was breathing hard or holding back sobs. Quincy stood beside him and put his hand on his father's shoulder. Father, tell me it isn't true. Tell grandmother she's wrong. Irving lowered his hands, looked at his son. His eyes were dry, red. Quincy, don't say anything. Just don't say anything. But I said, don't say anything. Quincy recoiled as if struck. I saw something change in his face. Confusion, fear, the first seed of doubt. The guests started whispering. Some pulled out their phones, others just sat staring into the void. Darlene came over to me, put her arm around my shoulders. "Oh my God, Gwen, do you really think he did it?" "I don't. I know he did. But why? Why would he kill Hope?" I looked at Irving, who sat staring at the table. "Money," I said. After Roger died, Hope had inherited our house. She had deposits, savings that Roger and I had set aside for her, all of which would pass to Irving on her death. And divorce would be unprofitable. They'd signed a prenup when they married. Darlene, aghast, covered her mouth with her hand. "That's monstrous." "Yes," I nodded. "It's monstrous." Sylvia walked over to Irving, stood in front of him. "Irving, look me in the eye. Look and tell me that Gwendolyn is lying." He did not raise his head. He sat staring at the floor, fists clenched in his lap. "Irving, get off me." He said it muffled, without raising his eyes. Sylvia stepped back, shook her head. "Lord have mercy. He really did it. He killed Hope." Quincy stood in the middle of the hall, staring at his father with wide-open eyes. His face was white, his lips trembling. "Grandma." His voice trailed off. "This can't be true. Father couldn't." I walked over to him, taking his hands. "I'm so sorry, Quincy. I'm so sorry you're finding out now, here. But it's true." He pulled his hands away, backed away. "No, no, you're wrong. The lab made a mistake. Or you forged the paperwork. Or, Quincy." I took a step toward him, but he backed away even further. "Stay back. You're lying. You're trying to destroy our family." "Your family is already destroyed," I said quietly. "Your father destroyed it when he killed your mother." There were sirens outside. They came closer, louder and louder. Then they stopped abruptly. Lester came out of the hall down the stairs. I heard a door open downstairs, voices. A moment later, two uniformed men came up the hall, a middle-aged man with graying temples and a young woman with a notebook in her hands. They looked around the room, staring at me. "Who called the police?" the man asked. "I did." Lester raised his hand. "There's a serious charge here. Gwendolyn Cresley claims that her daughter was poisoned." The policeman looked at me. "Are you Gwendolyn Cresley?" "I am." "Do you have any basis for this allegation?" I handed him an envelope. He took it, pulled out the sheets, began to read. His face remained impassive, but I could see him scrutinizing every line. Then he handed the sheets to a colleague. "This is the report of a private laboratory," the policewoman said when she had finished reading. "Chronic arsenic poisoning. It's serious." The policeman nodded, looked at Irving. "Are you the deceased's husband?" Irving raised his head, nodded. "Irving Morgan, this is a misunderstanding. My mother-in-law is out of her mind with grief. She doesn't know what she's saying. We'll figure it out." The cop pulled out his cell phone. "I need to call the detectives. This kind of case is out of our jurisdiction." He went to the window, started talking into the phone. The woman opened a notebook, took out a pen. "I need everyone to stay where they are until the investigation team arrives. No one leaves the premises." Irving sat staring at the floor. Quincy stood back with his arms wrapped around himself. The guests were silent, glancing around. Someone was crying quietly. I sat back in my chair, put my hands on the table. That was it. I had done what I had to do. I'd named my daughter's killer. Now it was up to the police. We waited for almost an hour. The police were standing at the exit. A woman was writing down the names and contact details of everyone present. A man was on the phone with someone from the management. The guests sat in silence, some of them finishing their cold coffee, some of them just staring out the window. The rain had intensified, drumming large drops on the glass. Irving sat in his seat, keeping his head down. His hands were resting on the table, fingers interlocked. He did not move, did not speak, as if he had become a statue. Quincy stood against the opposite wall, leaning back against the wallpaper. His face was pale, his eyes red. He looked at his father, then shifted his gaze to me, then back to his father. I sat in my chair with my hands in my lap. The envelope with the documents had already been taken by the policewoman, put in a folder she'd brought from the car. She came up to me several times, asking me questions. When I had last seen my daughter, when I had decided to do the analysis, where the laboratory was, I answered calmly, clearly, trying not to leave out any details. Darlene sat next to me, occasionally squeezing my hand. She didn't say anything, she was just there. Sylvia had moved to the other end of the table, away from Irving, and sat there with her arms wrapped around herself. Lester was talking to someone on the phone in a low voice, then put the phone away and went back to the table. Finally, a door slammed downstairs, and footsteps were heard on the stairs. Two men in civilian clothes entered the hall, one about 45 years old, thick, with a short haircut, the other younger, skinny, wearing glasses. They approached the policeman, talked about something. Then the older man turned to us. "Afternoon, Detective Morris." He showed his ID. "This is my partner, Detective Yost. We're going to be handling this case. We need to talk to a few people. Mrs. Cresley and Mr. Morgan for starters." Irving raised his head, looked at the detective. His face was gray, his lips bloodless. "I want a lawyer." "That's your right." Morris nodded. "You can call now, or we'll give you a phone at the station. But either way, you'll need to come with us to testify." "I'm going with my father." Quincy pushed away from the wall, stepped forward. "Who are you?" Morris looked at him. "Quincy Morgan, son of the deceased." "I see. We'll need to talk to you too, but later. For now, stay here." "No." Quincy raised his voice. "I'm going with my father. It's not his fault. She's the one." He pointed his finger in my direction. "Who made it all up?" Morris looked at me, then back at Quincy. "Young man, I realize this is difficult for you. But right now, you'd better stay here. We'll talk to you a little later, okay?" "No, it's not okay." Quincy took a step towards the detective, but he raised his hand, stopping him. "Don't make this any harder than it has to be. Just sit down, take it easy. We'll get back to you in an hour and a half." Irving stood up, buttoned his jacket. His movements were slow, mechanical. He strode toward the exit, Detective Yost walking beside him. Morris came toward me. "Mrs. Cresley, can you come with me? We need to record your statement in more detail." I stood up, grabbed my bag. Darlene squeezed my hand. "Gwen, are you sure you're going to be okay?" "Yes," I nodded. "I'll just tell the truth." We walked down the stairs. Two police cars were parked out front, and Irving was already in the back seat of one of them. He looked in my direction, and I saw pure hatred in his eyes. Then the door slammed shut, the car started. I was put into another car. Morris sat next to me, the policewoman behind the wheel. We drove across town to the Maple Street station. The drive took about 20 minutes, and I stared out the window at the familiar streets, at the rain, at the few passers-by under umbrellas. At the station, I was led into a small room with gray walls, a table and 3 chairs. Morris sat across from me, switched on his tape recorder, said the date, the time, his name, and mine. Then he started asking questions. When was the last time I saw my daughter alive? What made me suspect poisoning? Where did I order the test? How did I get the results? Why didn't I go to the police right away? I answered everything in detail, taking my time. I told her how Hope had been weakening over the last few months, how the doctors had diagnosed her with heart failure, how I'd noticed the discrepancies in her symptoms, told her about my job as a chemistry teacher, how I knew the signs of heavy metal poisoning. I told him how I'd convinced Hope to take the test, how I'd gotten the results after she'd died. Morris listened attentively, making notes in his notebook. Sometimes he questioned, clarified details. Jost sat next to him, silently writing on his notebook. Do you suspect your son-in-law, Mr. Morgan, of deliberately poisoning your daughter? Morris finally asked. Yes, on what grounds? He had access to her food, drinks, medication. He cooked for her, brought her pills. He had a motive. When Hope died, he got the house, the deposits, all the assets. In a divorce, he'd get a lot less because of the prenup. Are you aware of Mr. Morgan's financial problems? I heard from Hope. The real estate agency had fallen on hard times. There were fewer clients. Revenues were down. Morris nodded, wrote something down. Then he looked at me. We'll schedule an exhumation of the body. We'll run a full toxicology report. If the results confirm your suspicions, we'll prosecute. For now, Mr. Morgan is being held for questioning. In 48 hours, we have to either charge him or release him. I understand. You'll need to stay in touch. We may need additional testimony. I'll be in touch. They drove me back to the restaurant. By the time we got there were hardly any guests left. A few cars were parked in the parking lot, and the rest had moved on. I got out of the cop car, walked up the steps to the restaurant. Darlene, Sylvia, Lester, and Quincy were the only ones left in the room. Quincy was sitting in the same place Irving had been sitting, leaning against the table, his face hidden in his palms. When I entered, he raised his head. His eyes were red and puffy, but fury burned in them. You. He jumped up, knocking over a chair. Are you happy now? Quincy. I took a step toward him, but he backed away. Don't you come near me. Don't you dare. I know this is hard for you. You don't understand anything, he was screaming, his voice breaking. You ruined everything. My father was taken to the police as a criminal because of your delusional accusations. They're not bullshit accusations, I tried to say calmly, though my insides were clenching. I have proof. What kind of proof? A piece of paper from some lab? You could have paid them to write anything. Quincy, why would I do that? Why would I accuse your father of killing my daughter if I'm not sure? Because you've always hated him. He took a step towards me. Lester stood up, ready to intervene. Always thought he wasn't worthy of Mom, and now you're using her death to get revenge. I didn't hate him. I shook my head. I just saw what he was like, calculating, cold. Your mother saw it too, deep down. But she loved him, tried to ignore it. Shut up! Quincy clenched his fists. Just shut up. Dad loved Mom. He took care of her, did everything he could. He poisoned her, I said quietly but firmly. For months, methodically. Small doses of arsenic to make the symptoms look like a natural disease. Lies! He pounded his fist on the table, dishes clinking. It's all lies. Quincy, please. I held out my hand to him. Listen to me. I know this is scary. I know you don't want to believe it. But it's true. He recoiled from my hand like a snake. I won't listen. I won't. Dad's innocent and I'm gonna prove it. I'll get a lawyer, the best lawyer in town, and they'll declare you insane, and they'll let your father go. If he's innocent, let the police prove it, I said. They'll run a forensic test, check everything out. Until then, his name will be trampled on, Quincy shouted. Everyone will know he's been accused of murder. It'll ruin his life, even if he's acquitted. Your mother is dead. I raised my voice. Nothing can ruin her now, but the killer has to answer. He's not a murderer. Quincy turned around, grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. I don't want to see you again, ever again. You hear me? Ever. He lunged for the exit, knocked a chair over with his shoulder, almost fell, but kept his balance. Darlene tried to stop him, but he broke free, ran out of the room. We heard him run down the stairs, the door slamming downstairs. I was left standing in the middle of the hall. My legs were shaking, and I grabbed the back of a chair to keep from falling. Darlene ran over to me and put her arm around my shoulders. "Gwen, sit down. You look pale as a sheet." I sank into the chair and closed my eyes. My ears were ringing and my eyes were blurry. "Water," I whispered. Sylvia brought a glass, and I took a few sips. The cold water burned my throat, but it cleared my head. "Gwen, you need to go home." Darlene sat down next to me. "I'll drive you." "Thank you." I opened my eyes and looked at her. "Thank you for staying." "Where am I going to go?" "Your family." Lester came over, squatted in front of my chair. "Gwendolyn, if it's true, if Irving really did poison Hope, you did the right thing. I know it's hard. I know Quincy doesn't understand right now, but you did what you had to do." I nodded, unable to speak. Sylvia stood aside, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. "I keep thinking," she said quietly, "maybe I could have noticed something. Maybe if I'd been more careful when I went to visit Hope." "No one could have noticed." I shook my head. "He was very careful. The doctors didn't notice. I didn't notice until the symptoms became obvious." We sat in silence. The waiters began clearing tables, collecting dishes. The restaurant manager looked into the room, asking if anything else was needed. Darlene shook her head. He nodded and walked out. "Come on." Darlene helped me up. "I'll take you home." I grabbed my bag and we walked down the stairs. Outside, the rain had stopped, turning to a light drizzle. Darlene led me to her car, sat me in the front seat, and drove herself. We drove in silence. I looked out the window at the wet asphalt, at the reflections of the streetlights in the puddles, at the empty sidewalks. When we reached my house, Darlene turned off the engine. "Maybe I should come in with you. Sit for a while?" "No thanks. I need to be alone." "Are you sure?" "Yeah, it'll be fine." She hugged me, kissed me on the cheek. "Call me if you need anything." "Anytime." "I will." I got out of the car, walked down the driveway to the house. The keys were shaking in my hands, and I couldn't get them into the keyhole. Finally, the door opened. I went in, closed it behind me. The house greeted me with silence. I went into the living room, turned on the light, kicked off my shoes. My legs were buzzing with fatigue. I sank down onto the couch, leaned back, closed my eyes. It's done. I'd named my daughter's killer. I'd given the evidence to the police. Now they would investigate, check, look for clues. Maybe they'll find poison residue at Irving's house. Maybe an exhumation will confirm the poisoning. Maybe justice will be served, but at what cost? I opened my eyes, looked at the mantelpiece where Hope's picture stood, my daughter who was gone. Then I looked at the other picture. There she was, me and little Quincy. We were standing in the garden, Quincy holding a ball, smiling. That was 10 years ago, maybe 12. Quincy, my grandson, the only close person I had left after Hope died. And now I've lost him. He yelled at me, said he never wanted to see me again. I could see the hatred in his eyes, the same hatred I saw in Irving's eyes. He didn't believe me, didn't want to listen to me. To him, I was the enemy that had destroyed his family. Maybe in time, he'll understand. When the police find the evidence, when the truth becomes clear, maybe then he'll come back, apologize. Maybe. Or maybe he won't. Maybe he'll never forgive me for shattering his illusions about his father. Maybe he'll choose lies over the truth because lies are more comfortable. I stood up, walked to the window. It was dark behind the glass, only the sparse lights of street lamps. Somewhere out there in the city, in a police station, sat Irving. Somewhere out there, maybe at home, Quincy was sitting there, hating me. And here I am, alone in an empty house. No daughter, no grandson, no family. I went back to the couch, sat down, put my hands in my lap. I looked at Hope's picture and realized the magnitude of what had happened. Yes, I had named the killer. Yes, I had done what I thought was right. But the price of that truth was too high. I lost everything I had. For the first 3 days, I barely got off the couch. I sat wrapped in a blanket staring out the window at the gray sky. Darlene came twice, bringing groceries, making soup, which I hardly ate. She tried to talk to me, but I gave one-word answers, and she left, leaving me alone. On the fourth day, Detective Morris called. He said the exhumation was scheduled for Monday, 5 days later. Hope's body would be removed from the crematorium. It turned out the cremation hadn't been done yet. The coffin was in cold storage, awaiting final authorization from the family. Irving had been procrastinating, and now it was playing against him. The police had gotten a court order for the exhumation, and now the body would be sent to forensics. I listened to Morris and felt my insides tighten. Hope would be disturbed again, cut up, examined. But there was no other way. Only a full forensic examination could confirm or deny my suspicions. Mr. Morgan hired a lawyer, Morris continued. Gerald Spencer. He's a good criminal defense lawyer. He's already filed a motion to dismiss citing insufficient evidence. And what did the court say? Denied. Your private lab report was deemed sufficient grounds to continue the investigation. But be prepared for Spencer to attack you. He's already told reporters that you're acting out of personal animosity toward your son-in-law. Let him say what he wants. I have proof. Yes, but he'll try to discredit it. He'll say you could have faked the results, bribed a specialist. He'll insinuate your age, possible mental illness due to grief. I squeezed the phone harder. I'm perfectly sane, and Dr. Grange will not risk his reputation for money. I know he wouldn't. We've already contacted him, and he's ready to testify. But get ready for a tough fight. When Morris hung up, I sat on the phone for a long time. So, here we go. Irving hired a lawyer who's gonna make me look like a crazy old woman out for revenge. He'd say I was out of my mind with grief, that I made the whole story up. But I had the facts. Hair analysis, specialist report, full forensics coming soon. Facts don't lie. On the fifth day, I tried to call Quincy. I dialed his number, got a long dial tone, then an answering machine. I left a message, asked him to call me back. He didn't call back. I called again that night. I got the machine again, another message. On the sixth day, I went to his apartment. He had an apartment on Riverside Drive, in an old building with peeling plaster. I went up to the third floor, knocked on the door. No one answered. I knocked again, louder. Quincy, it's me. Grandma. Open up, please. Silence. Then I heard footsteps outside the door, the click of the lock. The door slid open on its chain, and Quincy's face appeared in the gap. Unshaven, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. What do you want? To talk. Please let me in. We have nothing to talk about. Quincy, please, just 5 minutes. He was silent, staring at me coldly. Then he shook his head. Go away. I don't want to see you. When you were little, you used to come visit me every weekend. Do you remember? Your parents got divorced, and I'd take you away so they could have a break. We'd bake cookies, read books. You called me the best grandma ever. Quiet. I do the same thing now that I did then, I continued. Protecting you. Your mother is dead, but you're alive, and I will not let a murderer go unpunished. I waited a moment longer, then turned and walked down the stairs. It was raining outside, a fine, nasty rain. I got to my car, got behind the wheel, and only then did I cry. The first time I'd cried since the day I'd heard Hope had died. On the seventh day, Darlene called. She sounded worried. Gwen, have you seen the paper? No, why? There's an article. About Irving, about the charges. I'll come and show you. She arrived half an hour later with the latest issue of the local paper. On page 3, there was an article headlined, Grieving Widower Charged with Murder. I read it. Irving's attorney, Gerald Spencer, had been interviewed by a reporter, said his client was innocent, that the accusations were coming from an elderly woman in a state of psychological shock after her daughter's death, hinted that I might be suffering from age-related mental illness, that my accusations were the result of a long-standing dislike for my son-in-law, said that the conclusion of a private laboratory could be falsified, that there was reason to doubt its authenticity. Then came a quote from Irving himself. I loved my wife, took care of her when she was sick, did everything I could to help her, and now I'm accused of killing her. It's absurd. It's a nightmare. I hope that justice will prevail and my name will be cleared. I set the paper aside, rubbed my temples. My head was splitting. Gwen, don't mind me. Darlene sat down next to me and took my hand. It's just a lawyer's trick. When the test results come back, everything will be clear. Yes, I nodded. When the results come back. But inside, I felt uneasy. Spencer was skillfully playing to the public, making Irving look like a victim, and me like a grief-stricken old woman. People would believe him because it was more convenient. It's more convenient to think I'm wrong than to admit there's a murderer living among them. On Monday, the exhumation took place. Morris called in the evening, said the body had been handed over to forensics. The results would be ready in 10 or 14 days. I wrote down the dates, hung up the phone, and sat down to wait again. The days dragged by slowly. I tried to do the usual things, cleaning the house, cooking, reading books, but my thoughts kept coming back to one thing. Hope lying on a table in the morgue, her body cut open, tissue samples taken, checked for poisons. Quincy is somewhere in the city, hating me, thinking I'm the enemy. Irving's at home on his own recognizance, hiring the best lawyers, getting ready to fight. And I'm alone in this house, waiting for science to confirm what I already know. On the 9th day, I tried to contact Quincy again. I called, got an answering machine. I went to his house. He wouldn't answer the door. I stood under the windows, saw that the lights were on in his apartment, which means he's home. He just didn't want to see me. I came home, sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea. The phone was on the table, and I stared at it, wondering if I should call again. Then the phone rang on its own. Darlene. Gwen, did you hear? What? About Quincy. He sold the car. I froze. What? My neighbor saw it. He put an ad out, sold his car. It's the same one he bought last year. A Honda, I think? Why would he sell his car? Darlene was quiet for a moment. Then she said quietly, Gwen, they say he hired a lawyer for his father. A very expensive one. Maybe he needs money to pay for it. I set the phone down on the table, closed my eyes. Okay, here's the deal. Quincy sold his car to pay for Irving's lawyer. He didn't just trust his father. He actively helped him, donated his assets. Gwen, are you there? Yeah. I picked up the phone. Thanks for telling me. I'm sorry, I know it's hard. When Darlene hung up, I remained sitting in the kitchen. It was getting dark outside the window, but I didn't turn on the light. I just sat in the twilight and thought about Quincy. He was such a sweet kid. Blonde hair, curious eyes, always dirty knees. When Hope and Irving divorced, Quincy was 8 at the time. The boy stayed with his mother, but Hope was working, and it was hard for her, so I'd take my grandson on weekends. We spent time together, baking cookies, walking in the park, reading books. I taught him simple chemical experiments, showing him how to mix vinegar and baking soda to make foam. He laughed, clapped his hands, asked for more. Hope and Irving's divorce lasted 2 years, a hard 2 years, when they couldn't divide property, arguing over child support, dragging themselves through the courts. I was hoping my daughter would finally be free of this man, start a new life. But then they got back together. Irving came back, promised to change, and Hope believed him. Or maybe she was just tired of fighting. Quincy was glad at the time. He was 10. He wanted his parents to be together. I remember him running up to me, bright-eyed, saying, "Grandma, Daddy's back. We're a family again now." I smiled at him and hugged him, but inside I felt anxious. Irving hadn't changed. People like that don't change. And now this boy I'd raised, who called me the best grandma ever, had sold his car to protect his mother's killer because he couldn't believe the truth, because the truth was too scary. I got up, turned on the light, poured myself some more tea, sat back down, picked up my phone, opened the pictures. There were old pictures: Quincy at 6, at 7, at 8, Quincy with his face covered in chocolate, Quincy sleeping on my couch after a long day at the park, Quincy hugging me and smiling at the camera. I flipped through the photos and realized that this child was gone. He's grown up, a grown man who has made his choice, chose his father over the truth, chose comfortable lies over painful reality. And that hit me harder than Hope's death. Death is natural. It's an end you have to face sooner or later. But that Quincy had turned his back on me, that he'd easily undone all the years of intimacy we'd shared. That was a betrayal. The second betrayal in a short time. First, Irving betrayed Hope by killing her. Now Quincy had betrayed me by siding with a murderer. I put the phone down, finished my tea. It was late, but I didn't want to go to bed. I knew I wouldn't fall asleep lying there thinking. It was better to sit here, in the kitchen, where at least there was light and warmth. The phone rang again. It was an unfamiliar number. I answered it. "Gwendolyn Cresley?" "Yes, this is Rachel Stone, a reporter for the Sun Prairie Tribune. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the allegations against your son-in-law." I don't comment, but people want to know your side of the story. "Mr. Morgan's lawyer claims that you—" I hung up before I finished. So it's starting to happen. Journalists would be calling, trying to get something out of me that could be sensationalized. I turned off the sound on my phone, put its screen down. 2 more days passed. On the 11th day, Morris called again. He said the preliminary results of the examination showed high levels of arsenic in the tissue. The final results would be in 3 days, but there was already enough evidence to arrest Irving Morgan on suspicion of murder. "We'll have him in custody tomorrow morning," Morris said. "There will be a formal arraignment, then a trial. It could take months, but we're confident in our position." "Thank you," I struggled to say. "Hang in there, Mrs. Cresley. You did the right thing." When he hung up, I sat on the couch, wrapped my arms around myself. So it was confirmed. Hope had indeed been poisoned. Irving will be arrested. There'll be a trial. Maybe he'll go to jail. Justice will be served. But why do I feel so bad? I got up, walked over to the mantelpiece, picked up Quincy's picture. I looked at his baby face, his smile, his blonde hair. My grandson, whom I loved like my own son. The one I read bedtime stories to, the one I taught to tie his shoelaces, the one I comforted when his parents fought. Now that man is a stranger to me. He made his choice, and that choice cut him off from me forever. I put the picture back, stepped back to the window. It was dark behind the glass, only the sparse lights of street lamps. Somewhere out there, Quincy was sitting in his apartment, waiting for his father to be arrested. Somewhere out there, Irving might already know that they were coming for him tomorrow. And here I am, alone. No daughter, no grandson, no family. I did what I thought was right. I named the killer. I provided evidence. I got justice. But the price of that justice was exorbitant. I lost everyone I loved. Irving was arrested on Wednesday morning. Morris called me at 10:30 when I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee, staring out the window at the empty street. His voice sounded tired but satisfied. He reported that everything had gone without incident. Irving hadn't resisted, hadn't tried to run, just silently got into the police car and let himself be taken to the station. There he was formally charged with first-degree murder with premeditation. Forensics finally confirmed what the private lab analysis showed. Hope's tissues were found to contain high levels of arsenic, with concentrations indicating systematic long-term poisoning. But most importantly, a search of the house turned up evidence that definitively linked Irving to the crime. In the garage, behind the old paint and thinner cans, was a can of rodent repellent. On the label, a warning about the arsenic content was written in large letters. The can had been opened, the contents about half used. Irving's fingerprints were on the lid and on the jar itself. Morris explained that Irving claimed to have bought the product over a year ago when mice got into the house. He says he only used it once and then forgot about the jar and it stayed in the garage. But neighbors testified that there were no mice in Morgan's house. At least no one saw or heard anything like that. And the fact that the product was half used contradicted his words about a single use. I listened to Morris and felt a strange numbness, as if this was happening to someone other than me. Here it was, the ultimate confirmation. Here was proof that I was right, that my intuition hadn't failed me. But there was no relief, only a heaviness pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Morris continued to explain the procedure. The preliminary hearing is scheduled in 2 weeks, where the judge will decide if there's enough evidence to take the case to trial. Then a date will be set for the trial itself, which could start in a few months. Morgan's attorney has already filed a motion to release the defendant on bail, but with such serious charges, that's virtually impossible. Irving is likely to remain in custody until the end of the trial. I will have to testify at both the preliminary hearing and the trial itself. Morris warned that the defense attorney would attack me, try to discredit me, present me as an unreliable witness. He would talk about my age, about possible mental confusion from grief, about bias against Irving. It was all to be expected, and I told Morris I was ready for anything. When the conversation was over, I put the phone down on the table and sat still for a long time. Outside the window was an ordinary autumn day. The gray sky, the bare branches of trees, the rare passers-by in warm jackets. Life went on as if nothing special had happened. People went to work, to the stores, picked up their children from school. For them, it was just an ordinary day among many others. The next day, Darlene arrived with the newspaper. She didn't even say hello, just silently placed the paper on the kitchen table and stepped back to the window, giving me time to read it. On the front page was a large photograph of Irving being led out of the house, his hands cuffed, his face half covered by the jacket someone had thrown over his shoulders. The headline was in large print, "Local real estate appraiser arrested on charges of murdering his wife." I read the article from beginning to end without skipping a line. The reporter laid out the facts dryly, without emotion. The arrest, the charges, the rodent repellent found in the garage, the forensic results. At the end of the article was a quote from Spencer's lawyer, who still insisted on his client's innocence. "My client is absolutely innocent. This is all the result of a biased investigation based on false accusations by an elderly woman who has lost her mind from grief. We will fight for justice and prove Mr. Morgan's innocence." I set the paper aside and slowly drank a glass of water. Spencer continued to push his line, but his words sounded less and less convincing now. The police had concrete evidence, the forensics, the jar of poison, the fingerprints. It was no longer just the accusations of an embittered mother-in-law, as he'd tried to portray before. On Friday, when only 2 days had passed since Irving's arrest, Darlene showed up at my door again. This time she looked worried, held a fresh newspaper in her hands, and hesitated to hand it to me. I silently took the paper, unfolded it, and saw Quincy's picture on page 3. He was standing at the entrance to the courthouse, face serious, lips tightly pressed together, hands shoved in the pockets of his jeans. The headline read, "Victim's son stands up for man accused of her murder." I sat down at the table and started reading. Quincy had given an extensive interview with a reporter from the local paper, and every word he said was a blow. He said his father was completely innocent, that this was a monstrous miscarriage of justice, said that his grandmother had always disliked Irving, considered him unworthy of her daughter, and was now using his mother's tragic death as an instrument of revenge. Claimed that forensics could be wrong, that there had been similar cases, that the rodent repellent found proved nothing. Half the houses in the city had it. And then came a phrase that I reread several times, not believing my eyes. My grandmother is an embittered old woman who can't accept that my mother died a natural death. She got the police involved in this crazy witch hunt, and now my innocent father is in jail. I will do everything I can to free him and bring him justice. Angry old woman. My grandson, whom I had nursed, raised, taught to read and write, whom I comforted after nightmares, whom I loved with all my heart, called me an embittered old woman in the newspaper the whole town reads. Darlene sat down across from me, took my hand in hers. "Gwen, honey, don't take it personally. He just doesn't know what he's saying. He's in shock. He's protecting his father. It's a natural reaction." "No." I shook my head, folding the paper neatly. "He understands perfectly. He made his choice, and that choice is not on my side." Darlene tried to object, but I told her to leave me alone. I needed to think, to process what had happened. She left reluctantly, and I was left sitting at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the gray autumn day. The next few days passed in some strange fog. I walked around the house, looking at familiar things. The old furniture Roger and I had picked out at the store 30-odd years ago. The pictures on the walls, the books on the shelves, the rug in the living room where Hope had learned to crawl. Every object held a memory. Every corner was saturated with memories. A teenage Hope sitting at that desk, doing her homework. Quincy playing on the rug with the cars I bought him for his birthday. Roger in his favorite chair by the fireplace, reading the evening paper and occasionally lifting his eyes to smile at me. Memories surrounded me on all sides, and each day it became harder and harder to breathe in this house. I realized that I couldn't stay here anymore, that I had to get out of here, start something new, or I would just suffocate under the weight of the past. I called Greta, a realtor we'd known for years. She came the next day, took a good look at the house, went through all the rooms, writing something down in her notebook. Then she gave me a price that seemed fair, and I agreed without even trying to bargain. Money didn't matter to me. I just wanted to get out of here as soon as possible. Greta looked at me with concern, asking if I was sure of my decision. "This is my home," she reminded me. "This is where I've lived most of my life. This is where hope was born and raised. This is where decades of memories are stored. Am I being too hasty in making such a big decision?" "That's exactly why I can't stay here," I answered. "There are too many memories. They're suffocating me." Greta nodded and didn't ask any more questions. A week later, she called to say that she had found the buyers, a young couple with 2 small children. They came to the inspection on Saturday, walked through the rooms, discussing among themselves where they would put the sofa, what wallpaper they would change in the bedroom, whether they needed to change the tiles in the bathroom. The kids were running down the hall, laughing, touching everything. I looked at them and thought about the fact that soon completely different people will live in these walls, create their own memories, and maybe it's right. Maybe the house needs a new life. The transaction went surprisingly quickly. I found a small apartment on the other end of Sun Prairie on Fifth Avenue in a new apartment building. Two small rooms, a kitchen, a bathroom, and most importantly, no history, no memories, just blank white walls and empty space. I hired movers, started packing things into cardboard boxes. I decided to leave almost all the furniture to the new owners. They agreed to buy it for a symbolic price. I took only the essentials: a bed, a small dining table, a couple of chairs, books, clothes, and personal belongings. On the day of the move, I walked around the empty house one last time. The movers had already taken out the boxes and furniture. The rooms stood empty, bare. The walls kept light rectangles where paintings and photos used to hang. I slowly walked around all the rooms, saying goodbye to each one. The living room, where we spent Christmas as a family, where Hope unwrapped presents and Quincy built towers out of a construction set. The kitchen, where the three of us had breakfast on Sundays. Then the four of us when Irving came into our lives. The bedroom where I spent 37 years next to Roger, where I woke to his snoring and fell asleep to the sound of his breathing. Hope's room, the one we'd never remodeled after she left, where her old bed still stood and the posters she'd pasted on the walls as a teenager hung. I locked the front door with the key, handed it to Greta, and never looked back at the house I'd lived in for most of my conscious life. The new apartment greeted me with the smell of fresh paint and absolute silence. The movers brought in the boxes, arranged the furniture where I'd shown them, got the money, and left, leaving me alone in this foreign, sterilely clean space. I sat straight down on the floor in the middle of the living room, leaning my back against the cold wall. There were boxes all around, some of which I'd written the contents on with a marker: kitchen, books, clothes, miscellaneous. The silence was so dense I could hear my own heartbeat. No familiar creaks of the old house, no sounds I'd grown accustomed to over the decades, just emptiness and white, featureless walls. I forced myself to get up and start unpacking. I started in the kitchen first, pulling plates, cups, cutlery, pots, and pans out of boxes. I arranged everything on the cabinets and shelves, trying to create some semblance of order and comfort. Then I moved on to the clothes. I hung the dresses and coats in the closet, put the linens in the dresser. I put the books on the shelf that the movers had fixed on the wall at my request. When my turn came to the box of photographs, I stopped. I opened it slowly, as if something dangerous might be lurking inside. I pulled out the frames one by one: Roger on a fishing trip, holding a pike he caught and smiling for the camera; Hope on graduation day, wearing a white dress and with a rolled-up diploma in her hands; a family photo at Christmas, all of us standing by the tree together, even Irving, who seemed like part of the family at the time; and another photo in a simple wooden frame that I took years ago. A summer day in the park, bright sunshine, green grass. I'm standing on the right, holding Hope's hand. She's in her early 20s, smiling calmly and easily. To her left is little Quincy, about 5 years old, wearing a striped t-shirt and short jean shorts. He's laughing through his mouth, showing the gnarl of a recently lost baby tooth. I vividly remember that day. We went to the pond to feed the ducks, Quincy chasing the pigeons and laughing when they flew up. Then we went on the swings, and he asked me to swing him higher and higher. And afterward, we bought ice cream at the kiosk at the entrance to the park, and Quincy chose the chocolate one, even though it always melted faster than the others. I sat on the floor, holding the picture in my hands, and looked at those faces. I looked at Happy Hope, who didn't yet know how her life would end. I looked at little Quincy, who hadn't yet grown into the man who had called me an embittered old woman in the pages of the newspaper. I tried to remember how I'd felt that distant summer day: joy, peace, the simple pleasure of spending time with my family. Everything was erased, blurred, lost somewhere in the past. I sat like that for a few more minutes, then got up, opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, and put the photograph there, at the very bottom, under a stack of old letters and documents. I closed the drawer quietly, carefully. I didn't hang the rest of the photos on the walls. I put them back in the box, carefully placing soft paper between the frames so the glass wouldn't break. I slid the box into the far corner of the closet. Maybe someday later I'll get them out and hang them. Maybe never. I finished unpacking in the late afternoon. The apartment looked quite lived in, things in their places, books on the shelves, clean curtains on the windows. But at the same time, it remained completely alien, impersonal, like a hotel room, where everything was functional and correct, but completely devoid of soul and warmth. I went into the kitchen, filled the kettle with water, and put it on the stove. While the water was boiling, I stood at the window and looked at the street below. People were coming home from work. Someone was carrying bags from the store. A young couple was walking their dog. A teenager was riding a bicycle. The ordinary evening life of an ordinary city. Somewhere out there, on the other side of Sun Prairie, Quincy was also sitting in his apartment. Maybe he was thinking about me at that moment. Or maybe he'd already cut me out of his thoughts, like he'd cut me out of his life. The kettle whistled. I turned off the stove, brewed tea in a familiar old cup, the only thing that connected this apartment to my past life. I added a spoonful of sugar, stirred it, walked into the living room, turned on the TV, found some news channel. I sat down in the only chair I had taken from the old house, put the cup on the armrest. On the screen, the newscaster talked about the weather for the weekend, then moved on to the local news. Road repairs on the main highway, a new shopping center that should open next week, a school art contest. The usual news of an ordinary day in an ordinary small town. I sat in my chair with a cup of hot tea in my hands and watched the screen, but the words didn't come to my mind. I thought about the fact that somewhere out there, outside the walls of this apartment, life goes on. People go to work, meet with friends, plan vacations, argue about politics, fall in love, fight, make peace. Somewhere children are learning to walk, old people are feeding pigeons in the square, lovers are kissing in the park under a street lamp. Life goes on, even when it seems that your own life is completely destroyed and it is impossible to pick up the pieces. I took a sip of the tea and it burned my tongue and palate, but I felt almost no pain. I put the cup back on the armrest and leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes for a moment. The family was gone. Hope is dead. Her body now finally resting in peace after all the forensics. Quincy is alive, but to me he's as dead as his mother because he cut me out of his life forever. Irving sits in a holding cell, awaiting the trial that will determine his fate. The house where I lived most of my life, where my daughter was born, where I was happy with Roger, now belongs to strangers with their own plans and dreams. It's over. It's all behind me. It's irrevocably lost. I opened my eyes, looking at the TV screen. The announcer finished with the news. Some entertainment program started. People in the studio were laughing and clapping their hands. I didn't change the channel, just continued to sit and watch, not paying attention to what was happening on the screen. The phone was on the coffee table next to the chair, the screen off. I didn't wait for the phone to ring because there was no one to call. Darlene would call from time to time, of course, to check on me. But that wasn't it. It's not family. It's not significant others. It's just a nice person trying to be supportive. The tea in my cup gradually cooled. I finished it, already cold and unpalatable. Put the empty cup back on the armrest. Outside the window, the street lights were on, their yellowish light illuminating the deserted street below. Somewhere in the distance, a lone car drove by, its red tail lights flashing and disappearing around a corner, and silence fell again. I got up from my chair, walked over to the TV, and turned it off. The silence became absolute, dense, almost palpable. I took the empty cup, took it to the kitchen, rinsed it under the faucet, and set it to dry. I went into the bedroom, lay on the bed on top of the blanket, without undressing, without even taking off my shoes. Lying there, I stared up at the white ceiling, at the smooth plaster without a single familiar spot or crack that I could recognize. This is my life now, I thought, staring into the white void above my head. A new life in a new faceless apartment, with no past to warmly remember, no family to give meaning to existence, no hope that things would someday change for the better. I lay in the darkness that was gradually thickening in the room and realized that now I would have to learn to live in this new reality, accept it as it was, and somehow move on, day by day, simply because there was no other choice.